Alright, welcome to the extra credit video. This one is on messaging and interpersonal. Just like the other extra credit videos, this is not information that is going to be on a test, is not required for speeches. It is just additional information, extra information from your public speaking introduction. And interpersonal, just like intercultural and argumentations, are courses that you can take at the college. And just let you know, sometimes I teach it. but I also want to let you know, if you are into psychology, going into healthcare, and there's a couple other fields too, interpersonal is sometimes a requirement, or you need to do, especially in psychology. So be aware of it. What we're going to do is just like the previous extra credit videos. You're going to be listening to me. In the videos, we're going to go over scenarios. You're going to pause the video. You're going to answer your questions in a reply. And then there's going to be 3 of them. And that's how you get it. Just as last time, you can't see the replies of your other fellow students until you post all yours. And all of yours have to be in one reply. Alright? Understand? Just like last time. You've done this before. Okay, so let's get started. First off, let's talk about what is interpersonal messaging. Messaging, you've heard me talk about throughout the semester. It is a public relations type term. It is the things that you know from the course, the definitions for general purpose, specific purpose, your thesis, what you've heard in media, catchphrases, slogans. Messaging is what you're trying to get conveyed to the audience, what you want them to leave with, or what you're trying to get them to know while they're listening to you. For example, this last speech you're doing the persuasive speech using the problem-solution speech pattern. When you're defining the problems in your speech, that is the message that you're sending to your audience. This is needed. And then we need to focus on this problem. And then the solution is the solution that you want your audience to know. So, and want them to consider or support. That is the message you're conveying. Messaging. It's a very important part of communications. And when you talk about interpersonal, just a quick definition. I brought up interpersonal before in class, but it's a communication between 2 people. It is interpersonal communication, and the course is the study of communication between 2 people. That's why you can see why it's important for psychology, healthcare, and other places. It's a very important part for communication in different cultures and so forth. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of areas that interpersonal can go into. But the basic thing I always like to tell students is interpersonal is anytime you have a conversation with the other person, even the slightest conversation. You ordering food or placing an order at the coffee shop, for that brief moment, it is an interpersonal relationship. You are the customer, and that is the worker, and you're conveying your message, and they're receiving, and you're going back and forth. It is brief, but it's a classic example. Both of you have goals, and both of you are trying to convey. One is in sales, the other person is in purchasing. So you understand interpersonal communication between 2 people. You're going to also hear that interpersonal is connected to the basic nature of humans, which is, of course, reproduction, and it's rooted in there. So if you don't be surprised if you take it interpersonal, they talk about sex, and because that's part of relationships. So it is an important part. So why am I bringing up a messaging and so forth? The reason why is this. One class that sometimes taught in community colleges and not is mass communication. And back when I did media, when I did public media, I still talk to people about it, but I don't do what I used to do anymore. One thing I always said, and I might have said it in class, when you are talking to somebody, your audience, in one aspect, that is interpersonal. You are conveying a message to your audience, a singular message, and you're hoping your whole audience is receiving the message in that way. Yeah, there's nuance and there's variations and so forth in the crowd, but in essence, you're talking to one person in group with the audience. And when you are talking about media, messaging and interpersonal becomes even more, where you are the messenger on television and you are the audience is the other person. When I used to do media, that's the way I work. And you've heard me talk about it now, not just with examples, but when I talked about, I always looked at the general self-interest of the audience I was speaking to. And when you remember what interpersonal is, the communication between two people, and you think about it in the sense of the audience and you can see how those personal things that come from interpersonal communication. In this case, we're talking about reaching someone's self-interest. It becomes a little bit more apparent. Now, this is just an introduction to interpersonal. Of course, take that course if you're interested. You'll find out more information about it through that way. But just keep that in mind. When it comes to mass communication and speaking in this scenario, it is the speaker and the audience, the two people in that scenario. And the reason why I talk about messaging is important. Now, before I continue, just like I said at the beginning of the semester, sometimes you're going to hear me give my opinion on issues. It is not to push an opinion, it is just to tell you what an opinion looks like, to give you an example of it. I'm very honest about it, and I do not use people's opinions against and so forth or anything like that. I'm very much influenced by horrible scenarios I've seen myself firsthand when professors do that kind of stuff. But you're going to hear my opinions and you're going to hear my political background. And the thing that you have to remember is it is just used as an example and not trying to push an agenda. So let's talk about me when I worked with Democrats and Democratic politics. And the one thing I always say about it, and I'm very honest about it, and why it is important. I have a history of messaging and working with media. Let me get my little notes here. And the one thing I always tell students, and you'll hear more of this if I teach argumentation, my side of the equation is really bad at messaging. Horribly bad. Remember what I said earlier, and I've said it throughout the semester, when you're trying to reach an audience, when you're trying to be that person who's reaching that other person, in this case, that is your audience, going after someone's self-interest is very important. In my background, I will tell you right now, and what I saw firsthand, just a minute, we are connected with environmentalism on my side of the equation. Save a tree. Horrible messaging. Horrible messaging, because for the most part people receive it and say, why do I need to care about trees? In reality, the better message is save the air we breathe by saving the tree. Simple. But because we talk about save the whales, save the trees, we're doing it for the environment, we're doing it for endangered species, in reality, these things have direct impact on humans, us, our ability to live. It's one of the many reasons why climate change and the issue of global warming had not conveyed enough, because it has not focused on the self-interest. Now you compare that to the other side of the equation with the term tax cuts. Now again, I'm going to give an opinion, but it's to stress how I feel about this issue. I think tax cuts are horrible. I think they are a myth. They never work. There's a whole lot more to it, but I have very personal opinions about that. But I'm the first to tell you, the messaging on tax cuts usually always works. It's not because it's a great policy or the thing. You heard me say it. I think it's horrible. But it sounds like something that affects us directly, even though most of the time it doesn't. Oh, I'm going to get a little bit more in my pocket? That's going right to the self-interest of people. And so you see those two things. Again, my side of the equation, bad at messaging, going after the long way around, not saying what's directly into people's self-interest, while the other side of the equation, even though I strongly disagree with their policy, better at messaging. And it's that personal connection with, again, the speaker and the audience, the two people in interpersonal communication. So why is this setup? What are we going to be doing today, besides watching me drink water? We're talking about one of the banned topics, We're talking about coronavirus and coronavirus messaging. There's a lot of opinions there. Let me get my notes. There's a lot of things. I believe part of the problem is that one side of the equation, or some folks went with one perspective, and instead of going back and saying, okay, we were wrong or we need to change it, they doubled down and they kept it, and that has created a big mess of disinformation. So before I continue, I'm just going to say this right now. We don't debate facts. We only talk about what is out there and how to create a message for that, knowing the facts that are out there. And what we're going to be doing in this extra credit is I'm going to come up with the scenarios to talk about in relation to coronavirus. When I ask you to think of a way to message it to get to the people's self-interest, actually change, and then you write it in your replies. Just a reminder, you do not write a reply for each of your answers. You write each of your answers in one reply. Not giant, but you know what I mean. And usually the answers are usually 2 to 3 sentences. So you have 3, in your reply you should have 3 answers. Alright? So before we begin, we need to talk about the facts of COVID, and maybe this will help you understand it a little bit more, and to cut through the disinformation that's out there, because it's severely impacting us. First off, main transmission of COVID is talking. That is one of the reasons why the spittle, the aerosol that comes out of your mouth when you're talking, is the major way that it's not. They're finding out it's not touch. It is what we send out in the air when we're talking, when we're conveying, and so forth, sneezing, coughing. But a lot of times it's just talking, because the reason why COVID is so dangerous comparative to others. Now you'll hear people say, oh, there's a huge survival rate and so forth. But the fact of the matter is COVID is dangerous because people can have it and even get rid of it, not know it, but they can have it and pass it along. And they don't even know that they have it, and it passes so much more freely and easily compared to other diseases. So while the survival rate might be low and so forth, the fact of the matter is the probability of getting it without taking precautions is greatly more than anything we've seen out there. Because usually when you have the flu, you know it. With those other extreme ones, Ebola and so forth, you know it. So that's the thing. That's why it's so deadly, is because you don't know it and you could be passing it around. Especially younger folks who don't have the repercussions, even though everyone can die from it. Younger folks pass it along. It's a lot more easier for them to pass around because they don't realize they have it. And so it's important to know that talking, and that's why some places like going to the grocery store in the local store, because hypothetically you're supposed to be in and out. The reason why indoor dining and especially bars are so dangerous, in movie theaters, is because you're not in and out. You're there for a while. You have plenty of time to possibly spread the disease. Alright? So talking is a major part of it, and that's why there's discrepancies on what is open and what is not. And then gyms, for example, indoor gyms can't be open because people are exhaling and so forth. The second part, people talk about the survival rate and so forth like it's the be-all end-all. Like it's not that bad, which is, see the numbers comparative to other tragedies in the United States. But the reason why I bring this up is because there's more than just the deaths. There is, if you have it, you can have long-term effects. And they just, by the way, just discovered that for men it might cause ED, which I think if that was reported from the very beginning, we would have probably handled it a lot different. But they're finding out even with young people, like right now with the NCAA players who are out there playing, and they're getting it. They're enlarged hearts and stuff like that. So there's neurological, there's respiratory, there's lots of other illnesses. But let's talk specifically about deaths. There's 3 kinds of death that we have to worry about with COVID-19. Again, we're just conveying facts because we're going to be using those facts and those ideas in the messaging. The number one death is of course, people who get it, who are get infected with COVID. That's number one. Number two are like the excess deaths when the hospital beds are full and people are dying because they're not getting treated because all the hospital beds are full because of the pandemic. We saw this at the very beginning of the pandemic in Italy and other parts of the world, and here in the United States. We saw it at the beginning with New York, but we're now seeing it across the world in what we're going to be calling the dark winter of COVID here in the United States. Rio Grande, the Midwest, other places where the beds are taken up. So you can go in the hospital with something entirely different, but if you don't have a bed to be treated, that's what another danger about COVID-19 is. Even if you survive, but you need hospitalization, you're taking up a hospital bed for a certain amount of time. And so that's another deadly part of this disease. Oh, by the way, if you ever hear anybody say, oh, they actually had other things, they just happen to have COVID. The thing about COVID is, they might have had obesity or something else that was a factor, but COVID was the thing that sent it over. I had a dear friend of mine who had other ailments, but it was pneumonia that killed him 10 years ago. So just keep that in mind. And the third death is healthcare workers. Every time a healthcare worker dies, they're not easily replaced, especially doctors, because of the years of education and investment. And especially in a pandemic, it's not like we're going to be getting from other parts of the world when all other parts of the world are having issues with healthcare workers. So the loss of healthcare workers have detrimental effects. And we're seeing these doctors and nurses having PTSD, things that soldiers and the military have to deal with in war. They're having the same type of treatment, and they're having increased suicides and so forth. So again, a lot of information there. And lastly, here's the cold water thrown on us. Our numbers here in the United States is absolutely horrible. There's no way to defend it. Comparative to other parts of the world, other regions with the same kind of income and development and so forth, we are way behind when it comes to mortality and caseloads and so forth. And we are handling it a lot worse than other places. I don't care what political party you're part of. It's the way it is. Alright, enough of that stuff. So that's a whole lot of facts that we can't debate. Now it's about messaging those facts and those ideas from it. Alright? So there's 3 areas to go on. The first area is about mandating... Here. Sorry, I need to get this. It's about mandating masks. How do we get people, how do we go after their self-interest? We just heard a bunch of facts. How do we go after their self-interest? Now, I'll just give you an example of what I'm talking about. When you do your write-up, you can talk about how do we affect their interest. You can use the examples of the facts, but how do we do it? Like, do we compliment them? Do we tell them it's a certain way to do it? Do we try to go into this area that's personal? Do we talk about their family? Do we talk about doing it for the kid? Do we talk about doing it for the grandparents? You've seen the ads and so forth that are out there. Come up with your own. How do you message getting people to wear masks? And after you pause and you come back, you're going to hear my 2 examples. And please don't go back and try to change it. There's no wrong answers. Just try how would you message to get people to wear masks when they're supposed to? And by the way, the answer is not they don't have to wear masks. They got to wear masks. Message it, pause it, and come back. Alright, so hopefully you did what you're supposed to do. The reason why people wear masks is because masks, it's about preventing disease coming out. It's not about protecting. If you want to protect yourself coming in, wear glasses. Studies have shown that wearing glasses help. The face coverings and of course masks help as well. It's not the be all end all, but the thing that masks help the most is prevent things from coming out. Alright? By the way, if you wanted, I should have done that first and then go back. Anyways, okay, enough about that. Here's my 2 examples. So the 2 examples I come up with is Be informative. Be informative and understand. Like, for example, I live here in Alhambra. I will tell you, I feel a lot safer here because I live in a very high Asian American population here in Los Angeles area. I feel safer than I would in probably my hometown or other parts of LA, because mask is part of the culture even before the pandemic. So if we were informative at the very beginning of this pandemic and said, hey, other parts of the world wear a mask when they're sick out of courtesy for others. I mean, I'd be honest, I hope this idea sticks around even after the pandemic. Wear a mask when you are sick as a courtesy to others. And show that other places do it. How can we do it too? Just be honest and say this is a courtesy. This shows that we're better or whatever. So that's one idea. The other idea is compliment the audience. Say, hey, you guys are smart. You understand probability. You understand when you go to the poker table, when you place your bets, the probability is higher or lower comparing the game or your skill level. Well, here with COVID-19, the probability of getting disease is much higher when you don't wear a mask. It is higher. You want to beat the odds. You know what's smart, and really smart is reducing the probability, because we don't know who's sick, but yet they pass it, and you prevent being passed by wearing the mask. Be smart. No probability, or beat the odds. Compliment them. Make them feel like they're smart. That's messaging. So that's an example of the first one. All right. So the next one is how do you message for people to do the requirements? The requirements of staying at home, to only do certain things, not to break the rules and regulations. How do we message? Are we getting tough love? Are we threatening? Are we coming up with scenarios? I personally like the Italian mayors when they were yelling at their folks and yelling at them, calling them stupid if they are having parties. But how do we get them to do the requirements? These rules and regulations are here as to prevent the spread of it. And how do we get people to go along with it? Because, for example, I have no idea why people take their whole family grocery shopping. I think it's horrible. I mean, why do you do that? You don't need to. Do we increase requirements? Stuff like that. So how do you get people to go along with the requirements that are being brought down by city and state officials, and even on the federal level? All right, I'm going to pause the video, come up with your own scenario and how you would message that and get people to do that. All right. So how would you do that? The examples I have are patriotism. Do it for the United States. I've been open. My first name is Leslie. I was named after my grandfather who survived Pearl Harbor. And his generation, they had the war, they had the draft, they had scrapping, they had rationing, they had, I think some parts had to lights out, and they had energy conservation and lots of other things, oil, they had to ration and lots of other things. So the greatest generation did that for years. Why can't we do this for one? In fact, I've actually said I'm glad most of them are passed away, because they'd be embarrassed by the fact that we can't do this. So again, patriotism. We're doing it for the country. We're doing it because the greatest generation had it much worse than us. And they didn't complain, they did it. They did their jobs. We need to do our job for our country. Patriotism. Second, ownership. Own the issue. We got to do this requirements because we're better in California than over in Texas with their higher rates. We are better here in Los Angeles than the places over on the East Coast. Or why are we letting other countries beat us when it comes to reducing the risk, reducing the numbers? Why are we own it? It's another example of ownership is, I've talked about this in class, when we talk about current events. As a man, my biggest criticism about this stuff is other men who are being weak. And own it up. Be a man, stand up, and do the right thing for your loved ones. Be a man and do that. You understand? Be ownership, identity, cultural identity, stuff like that. And we do that, talk about demographics and demographic ownerships and so forth. The hardship of U.S. minority community comparative to others. Ownership through that means too, demographics, stuff like that. All right. The last one is the hardest one, and that is messaging to get people to stay at home. Not just the requirements, but just to stay home. Do what you can to stay home. I mean, it's, go out, take out food and bring it back. Stuff like that, delivery service, but just stay home. Reduce the problem. I have said this when we're talking about current events in class. The reason why we have the curfew and the reason why we're having these new requirements in the state is because the governor and other parts of the country, they can't break down people's doors and tell them to stop moving that. So for example, this is why I have this. What kind of message, as you, the speaker, is going to tell your audience, member, as a whole, every time, my lovely stick figures, every time we meet with our friends, we meet with our friends with 4 people. Every time we meet with our friends, I wish I was in a classroom, by the way, where I have a big whiteboard. I love whiteboards. But every time we meet with somebody, we're meeting with different households. So if you're meeting with 4 people, you're meeting with their own households. And their households have increased the probability of meeting. So every time you meet with your friends, they hang out in this environment, you're putting up the higher probability of you getting infected. One of the reasons why we have this curfew and these new rules is because people don't realize they take a risk every time they meet their friends because they're meeting the other people in their household because they have the shared breath and the talking and so forth. How do we get people to stop doing that? How do we get people to realize that all they have to do is take Zoom calls and go on cell phones and talk to each other distantly, that they don't need to meet up anymore? That maybe they have one quarantine buddy who lives in one household that they know of, and that's it. Because the more households that interact, the higher the probability and frequency of possible infection. That's what we're seeing across the Midwest. Right now, studies have shown that the biggest spread of community of the disease right now with COVID is from that kind of meeting. It is not the indoor dining as much as it is the indoor meeting that you are doing with your friends and loved ones and so forth. And we're going into the holiday season. How do we get them to stop doing that? So take a pause. Think of a way to message, 2 to 3 sentences like the other 2. All right, coming back. All right, so how do we do it? The first one is something that's a little bit personal. Remember I said earlier that I had a friend who died of pneumonia 10 years ago. It was a horrible case of pneumonia that went around the United States. I had the pneumonia as well. And I don't know who gave who the disease. I survived, he didn't. Guilt. Guilt is a way that we can get this message across. Because I'll tell you, as somebody who that pops in the back of the head, it's not something easy to live with. Now, my scenario, my case, is different because my friend didn't take the right precautions, and when he was sick, he didn't, the health care and so forth, so I have less liability there. While COVID-19, if it hits you and it hits the wrong person with, has in the wrong way, they're gone, and and we hope to get treated. And when it comes to young folks who are more likely to survive, but they're more likely to pass on because they don't know it, the guilt you have from killing a loved one. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who've had that experience. My thing is 10 years old, and I'm actually removed from it because it was not as much, but I was not direct, and there was no direct thing because both of us had it. We don't know who gave it to who. And he lived in a different town, and it could have been, we couldn't have given it to each other. There's lots of disconnect there, but there's not with this. If your grandparent or parent passes away and they're staying at home and you're not, that's on you. Guilt. Guilt is a thing that can mess people up. So guilt is a thing. Another thing, and I really do need to end this, is I talked about masculinity and ownership earlier. But again, it is the thing about standing up for doing the right thing, doing it because you're the strong person. Man, woman, child, young, old, single, parents, whoever is out there. The kind of strength that we can have in this situation. We stepped up when others were bringing us down. We are better than them. That kind of messaging. We're not those idiots. Kind of call people out. And that's the last one I'm going to say on messaging. Personally, if it was up to me, I would curse everybody out and tell them they're being a bunch of idiots. But that's just me, and that's probably not appropriate. But it is the kind of messaging that we need in this kind of situation. So you have the three things. How do you message them? Put it in the reply. You get your extra credit. There's no wrong answers. Make sure you're appropriate as always. All that good stuff. And be safe. Make the right decisions out there. Because this isn't going to pass. But what we did during this time will not. Have a good one.